Hello and welcome to our September Get Centered. Thank you for taking a pause with us in August. And we wanted to let you know before we get started that on September 24th at 12 p.m., the Jung Center is hosting a Carl Talk where they have asked John Price, my husband and business partner here, and myself to talk about coming together after living apart, flourishing post-pandemic. And actually today we're going to be talking about the opposite of flourishing, which is called languishing. And many of us are languishing, possibly without even realizing it. But before we talk about what to do about that, we need to kind of identify what exactly is it. And as it turns out, its definition is that one is not thriving and flourishing, yet they are not clinically depressed either. So it's this sort of weird in-between state. And it can look a few ways. It can look sort of like meh feelings all the time, no highs, no lows. It can look like staying very frenetically busy, keeping yourself so active because you don't want to feel what you feel when everything stops or when you're alone. It can look like generalized frustration at yourself or at your partner or family members or just the way your life is set up. It can look like eating when you're not hungry, drinking to get drunk, taking medicines to rev you up or focus the mind. Anything possible to numb you out, too much screen time possibly. And then I would say it involves this sort of day after day, directionless, joyless lack of flow. And when I say flow, I'm not talking about being in this like productivity stream necessarily. I'm talking about being in flow with your life's purpose. So here we have the emotion of joy, which happens to land squarely in the organ of the heart. And what we do at the center, we don't fracture or split apart mind or body from spirit or any one from the other. So when we talk about any topic, we're talking about the body, the mind, and the spirit. So when I talk about heart, it's capital H heart. It's more than just the heart organ itself and what it does. A strong muscle that pumps blood throughout our body. It houses our joy or lack thereof. It houses our spirit. So hold on to that thought for a second while we revisit the basics of chi, which is the primal life force energy. There's no perfect translation for the word chi, but that's about as close as we can get. And so we need to understand a few basic things about chi. One, everything is and has energy, everything. Energy is constantly moving. It needs to transform constantly. Examples of that are the various states of water. You know, if it gets very cold, some water freezes. If it gets very hot, it boils. We have seeds that become flowers or trees. Children become adults. Nighttime becomes daytime. Everything is always changing. Even think of you eat food, your body transforms that food into energy, empties your stomach, and eventually you need and you're ready for more. So things are constantly transforming. And that's energy. The alternative here is that there is no energy. And where there is no energy, there is death of the ultimate kind. Nothing. There's just nothing. And then if we have energy that's not moving or it's stuck, it's ill, it's sick. And this shows up in ourselves. It shows up everywhere. Think of a stream of water that's meant to be moving, that something gets in its way and now it's bogged up and mold starts to grow and the fish inside start to die. It's just not a balanced ecosystem any longer. So this happens in our mind, body, and spirit as well. So if you initially have something that's stuck, maybe you have some pain, and that's mentally, emotionally, or physically, or all the above. But then if it's not addressed, it becomes what we would describe as dis-ease. It's gone on too long. It's becoming a chronic issue. And then if we still don't address the stuckness, then what we have is disease eventually. So now we have a diagnosis. We have the emotion of joy in the organ of the heart that is stuck. It has chi stagnation. Nothing is coming in or going out of the heart, or very little, right? Very little. But why? Why is this the case? And certainly here we are. Some of us might feel like we're kind of emerging, coming out of the COVID experience. I'm not sure it's ever going to be over. I think it will just continue to evolve, but we did have quarantine and we had to stop everything. But this did precede COVID for a long time now. A lot of us have been at this for a long time, this meh in between state. And why do we do it? Why do we live in a languishing state? And I think it's because there's so much pain. I was listening to the radio yesterday with my daughter, and Tina Turner's song, What's Love Got to Do With It, came on. And I noticed that one of the lines of the song said, "Who needs a heart if a heart can be broken?" And sadly, I believe a lot of us have done this. I think we have armored our heart organs in an attempt to protect ourselves, very well-meaningly protect ourselves from pain and possibly even from hurting others. But what often is a good idea initially becomes a terrible idea later. But we don't necessarily know what to do about it. We don't know how to get out of this stuck, stagnant state that we have in our hearts. So, what do we do about it? We have to return to ourselves. We have to return to our heart's desires. We have to find our self-value inside of ourselves as opposed to from the outside world. And so I've got some methods here that we can talk about. And what I want you to keep in mind is that often the most effective methods are the simplest ones. They're the ones that we think we've tried it before, it didn't work. They're the ones we've heard about so much that we have like fatigue against them, or they're not profound enough, There wasn't some massive research study that came out and, or some new machine that was developed. This stuff has been around since the dawn of time. But the other thing to remember is that just because something is simple does not mean that it's easy. Not at all. So here are a few things you can put in your back pocket. Actually, put them in your front pocket, put them front and center, because these things will slowly but surely, little by little, change your life, open your heart, and get you out of this languishing state. First thing, gratitude practice. Going through, chronicling, even if it's just the room you're sitting in, even if you don't have a journal to do it in, notice what there is to be grateful for in your life. So often we are focused on what we're frustrated with and what isn't working. Second, notice just what is. It doesn't have to have a qualification. Let me give you an example. Often what we will do is we will go into the what if land. If I'm worried about something, let's say I'm worried about my child at school, I can either say, I am a mom who hopes and prays that her daughter and son are having a wonderful day at school and that they are safe and sound. That's all that's true. That's all that I know. And this comes from Byron Katie's methods. The alternative is, what are they safe? What's going to happen today? Are they going to be okay? And notice all of a sudden there's a bunch of questions. There's a bunch of uncertainty. There's a bunch of invention that's going on about what could possibly go on. So staying with what is, what's true in this moment. We have to become friends with all the parts of ourselves. There are parts of ourselves that are kind of nasty, whether they're whiny, or complainy, or blamey. Maybe they're really scared of people who aren't like themselves or ourselves. And what we want to do when those parts of ourselves emerge is pretend like they're not there. And then they get stronger. They actually are given a lot more fuel when we don't acknowledge and incorporate every part of ourselves. So when those parts of yourself come forward, just invite them in, just notice them. And you can even have a little chuckle at how you are vast, how you contain every possible character that a human can have. And you don't feed that part of your character. You feed the parts of you that keep you a lovely human to be around. But denying that these other parts exist only makes them more powerful. Meditating, being still and quiet, is a great way to return to yourself. And this is one of those that a lot of us feel like we've tried it before. But we have to remember that it's a practice. It's never done. We're never done with this. So anything like this, it's going to bring you back in, similar to meditating, would be psychotherapy, acupuncture. These things, they trigger what's called interoception, or your ability to tune in rather than tune out. And last but not least, being present. And this is one that I think we kind of roll our eyes, like if somebody tells me to be present one more time, but I think it's because we don't really know what it means. And what it means is to have your mind and your body in one place doing one thing. So dialogue with your heart, tune into yourself, notice what is rather than all of the what ifs, and just see if little by little the warmth and the flow returns to your heart, and see if you don't move through this languishing toward what looks like flourishing just a little bit more.
Good stuff, Leila Scott. I'd like to note, first of all, that we are hopefully not our whole crew isn't languishing because they're out experiencing what should be done during the summer months and traveling and experiencing new things, as we gear up to kind of head back into a year that seems to be centralized around a school year for a lot of people. So we also had one of our practitioners who had written up a presentation, and I have her notes here. Laurie was going to present today. And so I want to quote a little bit from what she wrote, but I want to add a couple of things to what you've already said, wonderfully said. And then we can just chat for a little bit. The first thing that actually a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Sean Fitzpatrick, said also, apparently this Adam Grant fellow is really important when it comes to the idea of languishing. So I just want to read from a little bit from his New York Times article on April 19th of 2021. Grant writes that languishing is the name for the neglected middle child of mental health that can dull your focus and motivation, the state before depression and flourishing. He wrote that in the beginning, he didn't recognize the symptoms that he and his friends were having, knowing it wasn't depression and knowing it wasn't burnout. And so there's this in-between stage. And as we started thinking about languishing and flourishing, I immediately started to think about the doldrums, a term that we've used before. The doldrums in 19th century really means dullard, or somebody is dull or sluggish. It was adopted by sailors to look at when there's no wind and there's no energy to move. And so there's a stuckness, and if that becomes pervasive, that becomes depression or anxiety from our kind of diagnostic criterion that we use today. But it can last for a little while, and it can give you moments of contemplation, of reflection. There's a value in being in an in-between liminal state between flourishing and depression, right? There's even a value in depression. At its best of times, it's a transformative experience that helps resituate somebody's identity, because on some level, what a depression is that you're not living up to the ideas of the deeper parts of yourself that are trying to express themselves, and they're held back or repressed, and so the libido goes away from the world. And while Leila Scott says chi, we might say libido. So libido, it's mistaken to be understood as sex, as all about sex. It's about energy and connection. I have libido for my passions, and for my wife, and for my life experiences, and for the desire to go outside, and for my fantasy life, that there's a connection there. And if you'll notice that depression doesn't have any of those things. There's no capacity to dream and to envision and to imagine a life, excuse me, imagine a life that's beyond or transcends the current tension and dynamics that one person is dealing with. And of course, when it becomes pervasive, we call that a clinical depression. Interestingly enough, I mean, it's like an issue in our culture when we talk about somebody's sadness as depressed. I'm depressed. We say I'm depressed. That's not depression. That's sad. But because we're so avoidant to feeling sad, or feeling some of those darker, richer feelings that do bring about transformation, we avoid. And so part of this issue is we are a culture of consumers. We are a culture of productivity. And so when we build our entire structures of life based around the idea of consistently producing or materializing something, and then we hit into a moment, or we get into a moment when there's a lack of libido or a lack of chi or energy towards something else, it's a little like what the Buddha once said, don't get stung by the same arrow twice. The fact is that if I am feeling sad or listless or in the doldrums, and I have a conscious awareness that allows for myself to seep into that, I might be able to come out of it in a transformed way. But if I don't, I can become anxious about that space, or I can become depressed about being depressed, and it compounds. So I think one thing that we're really looking at is a cultural issue, right? I like what you said, Leela Scott, about, we've been at this a long time. What we're seeing is we haven't made deposits into the bank account of flourishing. We've made deposits into the bank account of productivity and materialism and consumerism. What's that?
Well, I just wanted to insert that the part of the issue with just, tomorrow I will flourish, is that languishing is so insidious. You don't possibly know you're doing it for
That's right.
a decade.
Yeah.
So people ought to be sort of, if this is sounding like, this feels like me, be very gentle with yourself. You might not have known yesterday. You knew something was off, but you didn't know that that's what this was.
That brings up a good point, because as you were talking, I was thinking, like, I had that thought, like being able to identify what are the aspects here. So I want to read through this, and Rodney, I want you to jump in. So here are parts, if you can identify these symptoms. And as I read this list, take note, and this is from Lori. She put this together, so I want to tip the hat to her. She says, if you can identify 6 of these symptoms, then you might be struggling through, or you will be struggling through, this idea of languishing, moving towards a more depressive or anxious place. They are feelings of sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness. Angry outbursts, irritability or frustration, even over small matters. Loss of interest or pleasure in most or all normal activities such as sex, hobbies, or sports. Sleep disturbances, including insomnia or sleeping too much. Tiredness and lack of energy, so even small tasks take extra effort. Reduced appetite and weight loss, or increased food and weight gain. Anxiety, agitation, or restlessness. Slowed thinking, speaking, or body movements. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt. Fixation on past failures or self-blame. Trouble thinking, concentrating, making decisions, and remembering things. Frequent or recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, or suicide. And unexplained physical problems such as back pain or headaches. And what I've noticed in my clinical office is, despite this earth-shattering worldwide event that we're all feeling, that has been, what we've experienced through COVID, there are a lot of people in my office who are not conscious or not aware of the symptoms that they're feeling. Why am I going to the bar all the time? Or why am I, social life isn't feeling even fruitful? Or I'm pissed off all the time. And what we'll tend to do is direct that outside and say, this isn't working, or I'm no good, not realizing that you're affected by a collective, interpersonal, and private trauma that we're all living through. and we're feeding off of each other. And what we need to do is really support each other. And that's obviously very difficult right now, given the climate of our social spaces. So other than that, I don't really want to go into much else. I mean, I do want to say that if you're in Houston, come to see the talk that we're giving on the 24th of September. It's a free event. You can come, and there's valet parking, and the Jung Center is a great space, and you get connected with that community there. I mean, they're doing a ton of work on mental health in the Houston community, and there's a lot of online resources too. Rodney, do you have any thoughts to add as we're kind of?
Just thank you so much. This is such a pertinent topic to me and to everyone. I love Leila Scott sort of lumping in compulsive productivity with languishing, because that's something that we don't often think about. And, you know, the emphasis on what is simple is not easy. Mm-hmm. And the fact that these things of actually getting to know ourselves and becoming in touch with ourselves, that sometimes these aspects of languishing is an invitation to get to know ourselves. But for a lot of us at a certain time in life, that may be a completely foreign concept, you know, and that to get to know ourselves is the same as we would get to know someone else. It takes intention, and it takes time, and it takes effort, all those things. And it's not an intellectual light bulb sort of thing any more than it is to get to know someone else. It takes, you know, it's something that happens over a period of time. I mean, one thing I would like to ask the two of you is, often there's this, I need to, again, these things we've heard a million times, but that are very, very true. We need to meditate. We need to, get some form of exercise, pay attention to our bodies, eat healthier, do these certain things. But sometimes when can, like, the effort to get out of the doldrums or a kind of languishing just be a repressing and a going back to an attempt to fix, and just going back into a productivity mode, so that then it doesn't really address what is coming up. So that's really a question. I mean, sometimes I've seen in points in my life and friends and clients that there's a kind of continuum between wallowing and repressing. It's like, when do we know that we're too stuck and we're just wallowing in a place that's not going anywhere? And when do we, in an effort to move forward and into the future, is it simply an avoidance of what's actually there? So how do we know the difference?
I'd like to say that it's not a moving forward, it's a moving inward. If you're just trying to avoid and move out, it's just going to chase you, right? This is like back pain. Okay. So we can either be mad that we have back pain and walk faster to get away from our spine, but our spine's going to follow us where we go. Or we can say, this is really, really uncomfortable. And it needs to be, because my back is telling me something's out of balance. And I love what Lori said, how that back pain could be emotional. It could be the languishing. It could be the heaviness that is upon you. So there is that importance of going back inside. This is not an escape. None of these suggestions are to help you escape. And when we say simple is not easy, that is that the practice is not easy and the dedication to the practice is not easy, but nor is what will come up. When you do these things, don't picture somebody on the front of the yoga journal at, the shore of the ocean where the seagulls are flying and there's no weather. You know what I mean? No, this is tuning in. And the reason you've been tuning out is because there's a storm inside that you don't want to feel. So expect very much for it to be uncomfortable and not easy, what you find in there. But you can either keep avoiding it and keep languishing and being half alive, or you can face all these demons, all these friends that we feel like are demons, and really start to flourish. And the flourishing comes through the facing, not through the avoiding. I'm glad you said that, Rodney.
And I want to read something Sean sent over, 5 dimensions of flourishing. They are happiness and life satisfaction, mental and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue in close social relationships. So
I would argue with the happiness one.
I thought the same thing, only because we've kind of tended to a lot of that. Like, this is from Vanderweel on the promotion of human flourishing. And of course, anybody, I think you fill this in, Leela, our guest, just say it. Why do you think there's an issue with happiness?
Because happiness is very transient and it relies on external stimuli.
Yeah. I actually like the term satisfaction and contentment.
Yeah.
Happiness, I think, carries with it a kind of, it's really unfortunate. And that was that guy that Sean Aker taught that, the single greatest predictor of unhappiness is the pursuit of happiness. And we're in a culture that pursues happiness. So I'm also reminded of The Immortality Key, Brian Murarescu's book. And in the very beginning of the book, it says this practice in Greece, ancient Greece. The motto for this practice was, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. And there was a certain approach to meaningful life events that was moving, I think, into the discomforts, almost to be prepared and ready for the inevitabilities of life. And if we live in a community of people, a collective community that suggests that we need to be the right temperature all the time, that we always need to be fed, that we always need to have our needs met, that there can't be any discomforts, all the creature comforts that are met in your entire life. You have a full bank account, you have a full tank of gas, you have a full group of friends, and you feel happy. If that's our expectation, then we are going to be set up to languish. And
I would even say people who have all that still languish.
Right. That's right. And my heart goes out too. I mean, this is we can joke about these kinds of things, but also we're talking about very real situations where, people are in all of our offices every week suffering the burdens of these discomforts. And I don't know. I mean, I tend to think there's a real collective issue here. I don't think that there's a personal issue. I think we have a collective issue here.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, when we started talking about doing this talk for the Young Center and it brought up this word languishing, and I saw a thing or two about it, I thought, oh shit, I've been languishing for a really long time. So it's not just our patients, it's up to. And it's like anything else. As soon as your eyes open to it, hopefully you don't close them again. You just keep them open.
You can't unsee it. Like that arrow in FedEx. I can't unsee that thing. It's always going to be there. So I know we need to, close out, but I think that, hopefully, yes, come to the talk if you can. Think about the ways in which your life symptoms, like I think the thing that comes up for me is like these pervasive patterns. And when I think about emotions, I like to think about weather systems. Like a hurricane will knock us out, right? Forest fire knocks us out, but it doesn't last, hopefully. Clinical depression lasts. It is a pervasive and long-lasting issue that takes systematic intentionality in order to help support somebody to move out of the depression, if they can, right? And languishing is, did you say insidious earlier? I really like that, because it's like it happens, it's like a parasite that you're unaware of, it's like zapping your energy and becoming the vampire of your joy. And I think that our first step is to become aware. I think, Leela Scott, that's a really good way to close, like just to think about the concept and apply some of the potential symptoms to your own life and have that eye-opening moment and say, what's happening here? I've been irritable. I've been, dreamless. I've been drinking too much. And we know that by all of the data that's coming out. I think in Texas, I saw some study at one point that said alcohol sales and consumption were up like 340% or something wild like that. Well, what does that mean? When people are put back on into their inner life and they're not able to move freely about the cabin and be in social spaces and be stimulated in ways they're stimulated and be around the work people, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know what to do, and I'll go for those spirits.
You want me to be alone with myself?
Yeah. Yes.
It feels intolerable at first. It really takes some getting used to.
Well, how do y'all want to close out? Rodney, do you have anything in closing?
I was just thinking about Psychology According to Seinfeld. There was, a great episode where George Costanza just realized that, everything that he had done, maybe if he just did the opposite, there would be a different result. So getting to know ourselves is part of seeing our patterns and how we would tend to deal with anxiety and not knowing what's going to happen and things like that. And maybe doing the opposite, doing something very different, doing something more playful as opposed to something more serious, or going for a walk instead of having a martini, whatever it is, something intentional to get us out of those languishing patterns. That's going inward. That's an attempt to connect to something genuine within ourselves.
Yeah, to me, that comes back to heart's desires. Truly, what are my heart's desires? Because we have put them on the shelf to heed all this and the productivity, and all the consumption, like you talked about, so maybe my heart's desire today is to be mad productive. Maybe it's to get out the paints, maybe it's to walk the dog for like ever, who knows? But just, what are your heart's desires?
And I think one of the recent insights that I've had is that most of the things that I feel that I do are so meaningful, like personal practices, whether it's meditation or martial arts or yoga or taking a trip. There's a part of me that feels anxious that doesn't want to do it. Like anytime I've done yoga or martial, like I don't want to go. I don't want to get out of bed and go do that. Like I want to stay in bed. But I know there's something beyond that resistance. And so I just have to, I on some level, have to push through 15 seconds of resistance, and then I'm off. And I think this languishing piece is similar in that, when I'm depressed and when I'm kind of listless, I don't want to go outside and I don't want to go try new things. And I don't want to so don't expect there to be a desire, right? Expect there to be a higher order of existence that you can trust and have faith, right? That's the definition of faith, right? It's not going to seem good, right? Or valuable. You take a leap and you move in the direction of something higher than where you are currently. Lila, Scott, you want to close us out?
Thank you for joining us today. Perhaps you realize that you might have been languishing for a little while now. Take comfort. It's going to be okay. Thank you for being here. Come see us at the Young Center on September 24th at noon.
24th at noon. You got it. Thanks, y'all.
Have a good day.